New Orleans, the hurricane. Phil Bennett, who was then the national editor at the Washington Post, was my foreign editor at the Boston Globe, and he had joined the Washington Post before me. And so Phil knew that I knew how to handle myself in tense, tough situations. And so when the hurricane hit, he walked right to my desk and said, "Can you get into New Orleans for me?" And I said, "Yes." And I went home, and there was, of course, now the New Orleans airport was closed down because of the flood, so I knew I had to get into Houston. So I flew to Houston, and I was going on that Highway 10, and it goes into New Orleans, and on the other side of the road, everybody was going that way, trying to get to Houston or Baton Rouge. And so people were almost out of their car window looking at me on the other side of the road saying, "Go back! Go back! It's flooding!" And I had a sign in my dashboard that said media. When you're out like that, the news desk has no idea what's out there and what you're doing. So every morning you wake up, on a fast moving story like that, you simply know that by 4 o'clock, you have to be someplace writing your story to meet your deadline. And so, I'll give you an example. One time I was in a little small town, miles from New Orleans, sitting at this little diner, writing my story to fax into the newspaper. And because you had to get out of New Orleans to write your story because everything was down. And one of the waitresses in this little diner asked me if I was a journalist, and I said, yes. And she said, well, there is a young lady here. She's like 19, and she's in the back, and she's washing dishes. And she took a canoe from her home and got to the other side of the river, and she walked 12 miles because she says she needs to make money every day to take back and help her family. That's a story. I mean, I said, where is she? And I interviewed her, and the next day it was on page 1 of the Washington Post. I mean, I think as a journalist that you just have to keep your ears open. And then one day I'm riding around New Orleans, and after the flood had hit, and I see these mostly elderly ladies standing in these food bank lines. And I'm very curious about that. And so I go ask one, and she says, well, we all have to stand out here with our grandchildren because our daughters have gone to Baton Rouge and other little small cities to look for jobs and look for places to stay. So I wrote a story about how the grandmothers of New Orleans are saving the day, and that story got a lot of attention. So you just have to keep your eyes and ears open. And then one time at night I went to a church because I was riding down this rural road, and the marquee on the church said, "Hurricane Victims Welcome." And I said, what's that about? And so I went there, and one of the church staff members said, well, we've opened up a gym, and we have got 29 people who we're letting stay here. Now, I didn't want to do a story just that 29 people are staying at this sort of church makeshift shelter, but I did want to do a narrative about how did you get here? Frank Jones, how did you get here? Marvin Smith, how did you get here? Mary Stinson, how did you get here? And so I told little vignettes about everybody and how they got to this little church on this rural road, and how they had set up this this like phone bank system to get word out to relatives all over the country. I'm okay. I'm in the church. The people here are helping me. You know, and it was interesting because that story got picked up on the wire services, and a lot of relatives of these people had a way or had a location to get in touch with them, you know, because they had seen that story that I wrote that was reprinted. And then they said, oh my goodness, there's Doris. She's at this church. Call right now.